Flames roared across the battlefield, and the sky was filled with burning ships falling like dying stars. While deep in the chaos, a single fighter ship twisted and spun in ways no human pilot should have been able to move it, and inside the cockpit, a girl sat with sweat on her face, her bare feet sliding and pressing over glowing alien symbols that floated in the air in front of her knees, and her breathing was fast and heavy because every move she made meant the difference between life and death for the ships around her, and a pilot's voice crackled in her ear, screaming in disbelief that she was flying without using her hands, and the enemy was closing in, and the memory of how she ended up here flashed in her mind 2 weeks earlier. Maya Trent had been just another young cadet in the Human Fleet Academy with big dreams of becoming a top pilot, but those dreams had been shattered during a sudden Zark attack on the training station when the alarms blared and explosions tore. Through the air, she had run toward the chaos instead of away from it, and found a little girl trapped under a fallen metal beam. The ceiling groaning above them, she used all her strength to push the girl out of danger, just as the structure gave, way on top of her, crushing her hands and sending her into darkness. And when she woke in the medical bay, the doctors told her the truth. Her hands were too damaged to ever be used again. They tried to speak softly, to make it sound less cruel, but every word felt like a knife. She would never fly again, never fight again, never be a soldier again. The days after were long and heavy. She sat in her room staring at her useless bandaged hands while the war raged on outside the base walls, and she could hear the ships leaving for battle every morning without her. Until one night, a quiet figure came into her room. The old engineer Harlan, a man with grease on his clothes and tired eyes. He didn't offer pity. Instead, he set down a strange, glowing device on the table and told her he had been working on something taken from captured Zark tech, something they had never seen before, a control system that did not respond to hands at all, but to the smallest muscle signals in the legs and feet. Maya thought it was a cruel joke, but when Harlan set it up, and the glowing patterns floated in the air before her, she felt something stir inside her, a chance a door that had been slammed shut starting to open again. She placed her bare feet onto the soft light and gasped as the shapes shifted at her touch. The controls reacted to the smallest movement, and her feet could move faster and with more precision than she had imagined. She began to learn how to make the light spin change color and linked together to move a virtual ship through a simulated battlefield. At first it was strange and awkward, and she almost gave up more than once, but Harlan's voice was calm and certain, telling her she was doing what no one else in the fleet could do because the Zark could hack human systems, but they had no counter for a pilot who used no standard controls. Days turned into nights, and she trained until her legs ached and her toes cramped until she could guide the ship with the same instinct she once had with her hands. And then the moment came, the alarms again, the shouting again, the same terrible sound of ships dying in the sky. But this time Harlan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the hangar where a fighter waited, its controls glowing with the strange alien light. She climbed inside, her heart pounding, and as the canopy closed over her, she remembered the doctor's words that she would never fight again, and felt a bitter fire inside her. And when the enemy ships appeared like dark shadows in the sky, she pressed her feet forward and the fighter shot into the storm, spinning and rolling in impossible angles, weaving through enemy fire while voices shouted in her ear, trying to understand what they were seeing. And in that moment, she was no longer the cadet who had lost everything. She was the pilot who could move faster than the Zark could aim, and the battle that she could not fight with her hands had just begun. The hangar doors slid shut behind her, and the fighter came to a trembling stop, its hull still glowing faint orange from the heat of the battle, and Maya's chest was rising and falling so fast she thought her lungs might burst, and the comms were still alive with voices arguing over what they had just witnessed, some claiming it was impossible, others saying it was luck, and the commanding officer ordering silence until reports were made. But none of that mattered to her right now because her legs were shaking from the strain, and every muscle in her feet felt like it had been set on fire. But deep inside there was a spark she had not felt since before the accident. And when she stepped out of the cockpit, Harlan was there watching with a faint smile like he had been, waiting for this moment, and he told her she had just done something no pilot had managed against the Zark in weeks. She had turned a losing fight into a retreat and brought every ship in her squad back alive. But the celebration was short because word spread fast and not everyone was happy. The next morning in the briefing room, some of the senior officers questioned the usefulness of her technique. They called it unpredictable, untested, dangerous. And even if it worked for her, there was no way to teach others to control a ship with only their feet. They said the risk of failure was too high in real combat. But Maya sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the hollow map of the war front, as if their voices were only background noise, because she knew the truth. She had felt the way the Zark's shots lagged behind her movements, as if they could not anticipate her angles. She had seen how their fighters hesitated and faltered when her ship moved in those strange curves, almost like a dance. No algorithm could predict, Harlan defended her, explaining that the alien interface bypassed all known Zark hacking methods because it used no human standard code and no physical joysticks or buttons, but the commanding officer gave her one chance. To prove it, a live test run with the fleet's training squad in a simulation meant to mimic the worst possible combat conditions. If she failed, she would be grounded forever and the alien tech locked away. So that night she returned to the training hangar alone, her bare feet slipping onto the glowing pads and the familiar hum of the interface surrounding her. She practiced until her legs trembled and her vision blurred, running through obstacle courses, dodging simulated fire threading through asteroid belts with barely an inch to spare, and every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the battlefield. She imagined the cold, black space full of enemies, and the one clear path through it that only she could see the next morning, the simulation. Room was filled with skeptical eyes, her fellow cadets whispering that she was only there because of pity or because Harlan had convinced someone high up to give her a pity run. The giant dome lit up with the simulated battle, and suddenly she was surrounded by dozens of enemy signatures moving fast and closing in. She took a breath, let her toes press forward, and the fighter surged into motion, weaving between enemy fire in sharp, unpredictable bursts. The other pilots tried to follow her path, but most failed, spinning out or getting tagged by simulated hits while she stayed just ahead, cutting through the chaos. She felt the rhythm of it, the strange pulse of speed and direction under her control, like music no one else could hear. And when the final enemy drone went dark, the dome lights brightened, and there was a silence so deep she could hear her own heartbeat. The simulation score flashed above her cockpit, and it was higher than any cadet had ever reached. The officers said nothing for a long time until the commanding officer finally spoke, telling her she had just earned a spot on a real mission. And the words hit her harder than any explosion she had felt before, because this was it. She was going back into the war, but this time not as the girl who had lost her hands in a hopeless fight. She was going as the weapon the enemy could not understand, and as she left the dome, she noticed something in the eyes of the cadets who had mocked her before. It wasn't pity anymore, it was fear and maybe a little respect. The day of her first real mission came faster than she expected, and the moment she stepped into the hangar, the air felt heavier, as if every sound of clanging tools and humming engines carried the weight of what was about to happen. The mission. Briefing was simple on paper. Escort. A convoy of supply freighters to a forward human outpost near the edge of the war zone. But everyone knew it would not stay simple for long. The Zark had been attacking every supply route they could find, starving the front lines of fuel weapons and medical aid, and if this convoy failed, the outpost would likely fall. Maya walked toward her fighter, her bare feet already tingling with the memory of the alien controls glowing inside the cockpit Harlan met. Her halfway holding out a small silver band with a faint green pulse, and he told her it was a neural stabilizer. It would keep her leg muscles from locking up in long battles, but warned that it could not stop exhaustion from creeping in. She strapped, it around her ankle and climbed into the cockpit, sealing herself inside the small world, where only she and the strange alien lights existed. The convoy moved out into the black sea of space, its ships drifting in a protective formation around the freighters. And for the first 20 minutes, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her instincts prickled the way the stars seemed to shift the faint static in the comms. Then a sharp alarm rang through the fleet enemy signatures. 36 Zark fighters. Closing in fast, the lead escort barked orders for standard formation defense. But Maya could already see the flaw in it. The Zark were splitting into 3 groups, one to distract, one to harass the freighters, and one to cut off escape, she pressed. Her toes forward and her ship leapt ahead, ignoring the rigid defense line as the enemy came into range. Their plasma shots flared bright blue across the void, but she moved before they fired, twisting and rolling her ship through narrow gaps as, if the blasts were moving in slow motion compared to her sudden changes, she darted into their flank, firing quick bursts that sent 2 Zark fighters spinning into darkness. The freighter's captains shouted over the comms for her to keep them safe, while the other human pilots tried to cover the opposite side, but the enemy numbers were overwhelming. She made a choice to do what no human pilot would dare. She cut her engines for a half-second, letting her ship drift into a dead spin, then reignited them in a reverse arc that flung her directly behind the Zark attack group. Her cannons lit up the black, swallowing 2 more fighters before they even knew she was there. Voices on the comms were a mix of awe and anger, some calling her insane, others telling her to keep doing whatever she was doing because the Zark couldn't keep up. She could feel it too, the way they hesitated, the slight lag in their turning as if her movements broke their targeting predictions. But the fight was far from over. A warning flashed across her controls. One of the freighters had taken a hit, and its shields were failing. She pushed her feet harder than ever, forcing her fighter into a spiraling dive to intercept the enemy closing in on the wounded ship. Her cannons fired in rapid succession, and the enemy fighter erupted into glowing fragments. But the momentum carried her straight into the middle of the enemy's densest cluster. Plasma fire streaked past on all sides. Her muscles screamed as she jerked her feet to weave between death itself, her vision tunneling until the last Zark in sight broke formation and fled into the stars. And then there was only silence, broken by the ragged breathing of the human pilots over comms. The convoy was safe, every ship accounted for, and when the lead escort spoke again, his voice was different. There was no more doubt, only a simple statement that she had just saved every life in the mission. But while the humans celebrated somewhere out in the dark, the Zark hive mind was watching, recording every strange, unpredictable movement, and in its cold, alien language, it gave her a name, the Dancer, and it ordered that she be destroyed at any cost. Maya had barely returned from the convoy mission when new orders came down from Fleet Command, and this time there was no time to rest, because the mission was unlike anything she had faced before. They had discovered the location of a massive Zark carrier ship hidden beyond the asteroid. Fields a ship large enough to carry thousands of fighters, and if destroyed, it could give humanity a rare advantage. But the carrier was heavily defended, and no ordinary attack could reach it without being torn apart. Fleet Command wanted a small infiltration team to break in, destroy its shield generator, and escape before the enemy could respond. Maya was assigned as the mission's only fighter escort, a decision that sparked immediate protests from several squad members who saw her as a risky experiment rather than a reliable ally, but the commanding officer silenced them, saying the mission's survival depended on unpredictability, and right now, unpredictability had a name. She met her squad for the first time in the staging, their faces hard and unreadable. One man named Rourke muttered that he didn't trust anyone who flew with bare feet, and another pilot. A quiet woman named Silva gave her a small nod, as if to say she would wait to judge for herself the squads. Infiltration craft launched into the cold dark, sliding through the twisting maze of asteroids, with Maya darting ahead, scanning for enemy patrols. Her bare feet danced over the glowing controls, sending her ship weaving through narrow gaps with only centimeters to spare, and for a while the silence was so complete she began to think they might actually make it without a fight. But then the carrier loomed ahead, its enormous hull bristling with turrets and docking bays, and in that moment, the darkness came alive, dozens of Zark fighters erupted from hidden ports, and the black sky filled with streaks of deadly blue light. Rourke cursed over the comms, their shields sparking as the enemy swarmed them. The infiltration craft tried to push forward, but the fighters were too fast, and too many Maya dove into the chaos, her ship twisting in sudden arcs, slicing through the enemy formation before they could react. She fired on the closest fighters, forcing them to break off and chase. Her instead pulling them away from the vulnerable craft, the Zark shots missed by meters as she curved and spun faster than they could track, but the swarm was adapting, moving to cut her off, and that was when the infiltration craft sent a panicked message. Its systems had been hit by a strange virus, freezing half its controls. They were dead in space, and the enemy was closing in. Maya realized instantly what was happening. This was the rumored Zark codebreaker weapon, a digital parasite that could lock out human pilots in seconds. It had taken months for the fleet to even confirm it existed. Now it was here in front of her, and the only reason she wasn't frozen too was because her alien interface didn't use the same pathways. The human ships did without thinking. She told the squad to hand over their ships one by one. She linked her fighter to the first disabled craft, routing its systems through her own interface. Her bare feet moving twice as fast, now controlling not just her ship, but the others at the same time. The strain hit her instantly. Her mind struggling to separate the streams of movement, each ship needing different maneuvers to avoid enemy fire. It was like playing 3 games of survival at once in a storm. That could kill her in a heartbeat. Silva's voice cut through the chaos, guiding her fire. Rourke grudgingly admitting she was keeping them alive as they blasted a path toward the carrier's shield generators, and with a final coordinated strike, the infiltration team planted their charges, the explosion ripping through the carrier's defenses and forcing the swarm to scatter. But Maya could barely feel the victory, her vision swimming, her legs burning as if they had been set on fire from the inside somehow. She got all 3 ships moving again, dodging the last enemy fire until the infiltration craft jumped to safety. The moment they were clear, her muscles gave out, her head dropping forward against the console, and the last thing she heard before darkness took her was Rourke's voice, saying into the comms that maybe the dancer was the only reason they were still breathing. Word of the carrier's destruction spread through the fleet like fire through dry grass, and for the first time in months, there was a ripple of hope across the front lines. But for Maya, the days after the mission blurred together in a haze of muscle pain and exhaustion. Her legs ached so badly she could barely stand, and Harlan ordered her to rest. But rest was a luxury the war would not allow, because the success of her alien interface had set off something unexpected every day more. Soldiers arrived at the hangar, men and women who had lost arms, hands, or mobility from injuries, and had been told their fighting days were over. They came to learn from her and from the small group of engineers now studying the alien controls, and soon there were more foot pilots than anyone had imagined could be possible. They were awkward and clumsy at first, their movements hesitant, but Maya saw herself in them, saw the same stubborn spark that had driven her to keep flying when everyone else had said she was finished, and within weeks the fleet had a new wave of fighters, each immune to Zark hacking, and each ready to fight back in ways the enemy had never faced before. Battles that would have ended in defeat now ended in victory, as the foot pilots' unpredictable maneuvers tore through enemy formations. But hope has a way of making enemies desperate, and the hive mind was no exception. Intelligence reports confirmed the Zark were building a new weapon, one that did not just target ships, but targeted the pilots themselves. A focused biopulse that could paralyze muscle movement in seconds. No matter the control system, if deployed, it would end the new advantage before it truly began. Fleet Command decided the weapon. had to be destroyed before it reached the front lines, and Maya was given the mission to lead the strike. A team of veteran foot pilots, including Silva and even Rourke, volunteered to go with her. The attack would be deep behind enemy lines, targeting a heavily fortified research facility on the surface of a barren moon. As the strike team launched, Maya's gut twisted with the knowledge that this would be nothing like the convoy mission or the carrier infiltration, the facility's defense. Grid was unlike anything they had faced before the moment they dropped out of warp. Dozens of automated turrets locked onto them, spitting rapid streams of fire into the thin atmosphere. The sky lit up with deadly arcs of plasma, and for a moment, it felt like the mission would end before it began. But Maya pushed her fighter into a low, twisting dive, skimming the jagged moon surface, forcing the turrets to shoot wide. The others followed, and together they wove through the storm until they reached the outer shield. Rourke and Silva split off to take down the generators, while Maya and two others stayed high, drawing the defenders into a chaotic chase. Her feet moved in patterns faster than thought, rolling her ship over and under streams of fire until the shield collapsed and the team surged inside the perimeter. Enemy fighters screamed up from the surface, trying to cut them off. The air became a spinning mess of light and speed as the foot pilots darted and curved in every direction, their alien interfaces allowing them to slip through impossible gaps. The facility loomed ahead, its central tower glowing with the heat of the weapon inside Maya's targeting systems locked on, but heavy fire from the tower's guard ships kept. Pinned her shields, sparking dangerously close to failure. She dropped into a sudden stall, letting her ship plummet just above the moon's surface before snapping her thrusters sideways to slide under the guard ships and then rocketing straight toward the tower at point-blank range. Her cannons roared, tearing into the structure until the weapon's core went critical. The explosion ripped the central tower apart, a blinding bloom of fire and debris swallowing everything in a roaring wave. She barely pulled free, the shockwave rattling her teeth. But when the light faded, the weapon was gone, and the facility was a smoking crater. The surviving foot pilots regrouped, battered but alive, and as they pulled away from the burning moon, the comms lit up with cheering from the fleet. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, knowing the war had just turned again. But in the cold shadows beyond the moon, the hive mind was still watching and learning, and it would not stop until the dancer was gone forever. The warning came only 3 days after the moon strike, and it hit the fleet like a punch to the gut. The hive mind itself was moving into the war zone aboard a ship unlike anything humanity had ever faced. A fortress the size of a city, bristling with weapons and carrying enough fighters to crush an entire sector, and every report said the same thing. The hive mind was coming for her. The Dancer Fleet Command gathered every available ship to intercept, knowing if the hive mind's vessel reached human space, the war could end in weeks. Maya stood in the hangar as crews worked at a frantic pace around her. Her fighter already glowing with the alien interface lights, Harlan made final adjustments. His hands moving quickly, but his voice low and steady, telling her the hive mind's ship was different. Its weapons faster, its pilots sharper, and it would adapt to every move she made, unless she kept changing faster than it could learn. Silva and Rourke approached their own fighters, both looking grim but ready. There were no jokes, no rivalry left between them, only the quiet understanding that this could be the last mission they ever flew. The battle began at the edge of a dying star, its red light bleeding across the blackness. The hive mind's warship emerged from the void like a moving mountain, its hull covered in shifting plates of armor that glinted with alien energy, and then the fighters poured out in a black tide, hundreds of them moving in perfect sync. The first wave hit the human fleet like a hammer, tearing through outer defenses and forcing the escorts to fall back. Maya dove into the swarm, her bare feet already pressing a rhythm into the glowing controls. Alien lights pulsing with every movement, her ship spun and rolled in dizzying spirals, plasma bolts slicing past her canopy by inches. She moved like she was dancing through the void, every shift of her toes and every flex of her legs sending her fighter into impossible angles. The hive mind's pilots reacted with frightening speed, forcing her to change her patterns again and again, breaking into tighter curves, sharper drops, faster spins. Her body screamed with the effort, her breath ragged. In her throat. But she refused to slow down. She drew the enemy's focus, pulling them away from the fleet so the heavier human ships could break through the outer defenses. But the hive mind was watching, and then it came, a single, massive warship, breaking formation, moving straight toward her, its movements as sharp and unpredictable as her own. The hive mind itself was. In that cockpit, she could feel it, the way it mirrored her feints and dodges, as if reading her thoughts. The duel became a blur of motion, her ship whipping through the chaos as the hive mind matched her move for move, every near miss, sending shocks through her frame until she realized it was pushing her back toward the edge of the star's gravity. Well, if she went too far, she'd be pulled in and burned alive. She forced her feet to move faster, twisting into loops that defied inertia, each one pulling her a fraction closer to the enemy ship. She opened comms to Rourke and Silva, giving them a single word now, and the 2-foot pilots burst from the swarm, flanking the hive mind's warship, blasting its shields at point-blank range. The distraction gave her the opening she needed. She dove under the warship's belly, firing her cannons in a continuous stream until the armor split open, and the heat from the dying star licked across the exposed hull. The hive mind tried to break away, but she was already inside the gap, planting a string of explosives with the precision of a final step in a dance. She spun away just as the charges detonated a chain of explosions ripping through the massive vessel, the shock wave knocking her fighter sideways, but she pulled it back under control and watched as the hive mind's ship broke apart, its perfect formations scattering without its leader. The human fleet surged forward, driving the Zark into full retreat. For the first time in years, the sky was theirs again, as the wreckage burned in the light of the dying star. Maya sat in the silence of her cockpit, her bare feet still resting on the fading glow of the alien controls, her body aching from head to toe. She whispered to herself that her hands had been taken, but her fight never had, and as she turned her ship toward home, she knew the war was far from over, but so was she.